Trevor, this is why it's really hard for Marcel to edit, because she speaks quietly in a reasonable voice and I shout. Because I'm angry at you. Hello and welcome to Witch Please, a fortnightly podcast about the Harry Potter world. I'm Hannah McGregor.
I'm Marcel Cosman.
And I'm Neale Barnholden.
Good reading of punctuation, Neil. Today we're bringing you a delightfully Neil-filled movie episode about the sixth movie in the Harry Potter franchise, 2009's Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince.
I've got a really good feeling about Hogwarts. I feel it's the place to be tonight. Do you know what I mean? No.
Enjoying your classes, Harry?
But before we get deep into discussion about this hilarious teen sex comedy romp-around, let's... But before we get deep into discussion about this hilarious teen sex comedy Romparoo...
20 minutes from now, they'll just be like, rompa lompa doobity boo.
Rompa Doppa Ding Dong!
The first episode we released entirely uncut.
You asked for it. Let's read IMDb's entirely inaccurate synopsis. As Harry Potter begins his sixth year at Hogwarts, he discovers an old book marked as the property of the Half-Blood Prince and begins to learn more about Lord Voldemort's dark past.
That just doesn't sound right to me at all. There isn't a single reference to sexy teens in there. But don't worry, because you know what sexy teens love? Professor time with Marcel.
Enjoying your classes, Harry?
Oh, wow, that sounded so inappropriate. Sorry, Marcel, I'm going to get you fired.
I do have a chili pepper on ratemyprofessor.com.
Unsurprising.
What you see before you is a curious little potion.
Our increasingly inappropriately named discussion of adaptation theory and how the movies engage with and interpret the books. Hey, Marcel, you want to tell us anything about adaptation theory?
No, at this point, I feel like we've done a thorough job of covering the basics of adaptation theory, and I trust us to henceforth just go full throttle in discussing how this movie differs from the book and why that is interesting, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like as a movie, this is less interesting than previous installments, but it's also a pretty good movie.
How dare you?
Just gonna throw this out there.
Okay,
Throw this out there.
now we're gonna fight.
I don't like it as an adaptation quite as much as I think I liked the fifth movie as an adaptation. And I don't like it quite as much as I like the coming adaptations that we will see in like a year and a half, whenever it is that we get to them. But I definitely like it more than 1, 2, 3, or 4. So yeah, Neil, we're gonna fight. We're gonna fight, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I think Neil made a very strong claim there. Like, his claim may have been almost the same as the one you just made, which is like, it's fine, it's just not as strong as some of the other ones. Just like a totally reasonable thing to say.
Why would you agree with me?
So, I agree with both of you. You're both wrong. So, I think we want to start off by talking about a couple of the scenes that were added in, that were really conspicuously added in, and sort of talking through a little bit what their function is in the movie version. And there's 3 that really stuck out for me as sort of radical departures. And the first one is the opening of the movie, right? Both that it opens at the end of the 5th year, right? It opens in that moment right after Sirius has died. And then when it moves forward, we're told by Dumbledore that Harry is in Little Whinging. But what he's actually in is some creepy subterranean cafe that is entirely lit in green, that does not look like the Little Whinging we've seen at all. It looks very like urban and gritty. The Dursleys are entirely absent, and the only explanation we get is Dumbledore telling Harry that he's being risky, that he's living dangerously this summer, and that he will not return to the Dursleys to collect his stuff.
So it wasn't until you used the word urban and gritty and then talked about how Harry is living dangerously that...
You realize I'm racist?
No, I realized that that particular casting was like a really racialized move to cast the woman who works at the cafe as a black woman. because it was one of those things where at first I thought it was just an innocuous, like, look, we're not racist. We have characters of color. Here's one, for example. But now that I'm thinking about it in those terms, it's actually a really like racially charged casting choice. And it's like super uncomfortable.
I think that's true, actually, that it says something that the one person of color who gets a significant role in this movie has to signify the mundane urban reality that Harry is then taken out of for the entire rest of the movie. Yeah. I do think it's quite interesting that this movie spends a lot of time at the beginning in the Muggle world that isn't specifically connected to Harry, but that's just kind of an interesting choice. I think Hannah was making a point about the bridge.
Yeah, because the as far as I recall, they do not specify the bridge in the book, right? It's just like, we know that a bridge has been destroyed. But the bridge that we actually see being destroyed at the beginning is a pretty, believe it's called the Millennium Bridge. I might be wrong. But yeah, it's like this really iconic London site. And it's part of that interesting opening, right? That rather than opening with the chapter from the Muggle Prime Minister's perspective that simply reports back to us what's been happening in the Muggle world and the attempts to cover it up. Instead, we're shown this stuff happening in a way that's actually pretty fucking hard to cover up, right? Like, we see the dark mark in the sky. We see a huge, major, like, London urban icon getting destroyed in front of tons of people, right? And so the stakes are higher right from the beginning, I think. Which makes the wacky teen sex comedy seem all the sillier.
Yeah.
So any theories for why the Dursleys aren't there?
I feel like they just don't belong in what these movies are like anymore. The movies are so grim at this point. I mean, well, they spend about 70% of their time being grim and then 70% of their time being a wacky teen sex comedy.
That's not how percentages work, Neale.
Sometimes it's both. What can I say? There's an overlap.
It's like a Venn diagram, okay? Just go with it. All right, so speaking of scenes that raise the stakes, right? There's another scene that they've added in the movie that also seems to really raise the stakes, which is the one, I feel so much like I'm interviewing you guys right now. Like, I have all of these questions and I'm like, what do you think is happening in this scene?
Is that why you nailed me to the wall in the math thing?
Yep. It's gotcha journalism. Yeah, so the scene where, like, it's Christmas at the Burrow, we have that in the book, but it's all, like, sort of cozy and lovely. But instead, Christmas in the Burrow, the fucking Burrow gets burned down, which is, like, a pretty remarkable shift.
Yeah, I find that scene really confusing because on the one hand, I think it's a really beautiful and emotionally poignant scene. The running through the tall grass and the kind of swampy waters around the Burrow, and the colors, and having, like, it's dark and it's nighttime, but all the tall grass is really lit in a kind of gold. And it's really, really chilling. I really like the scene for its emotional impact, but I don't understand the point of it, because the Burrow does not get destroyed in the story.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Commence Obliviate in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Sorry, spoiler, but it'll be back in the next movie. Yeah, I guess I'm just not clear what its purpose is. To me, it feels like its only purpose is to demonstrate Ginny's incredible love for Harry, because she's willing to literally put her life at risk in order to make sure that he's okay. They run out in there together with all these Death Eaters, and then the Death Eaters just peace out.
Feels to me like a threat, right? Like, the Death Eaters burned down their house to show to them that they could burn down their house whenever they wanted, which is sort of this larger, like, way in which the movie is sort of setting this darker tone right from the beginning, being like, shit has gotten very real at this point. But I also have a theory about reading that scene in general when we read it against what we were talking about in the novel, which was a reading of Lupin as queer, about werewolfism as having this sort of subtext of HIV, the way in which Lupin and Tonk's relationship seems so one-sided, and the way in which Fenrir, while we're told that he's particularly interested in biting children, we only ever see his attention directed towards little boys. And so I actually feel like one of the big pieces of work that this scene in general is doing is writing all of that queer subtext out as much as it can, right? So we have Tonks and Lupin just are in a relationship. Yeah. It's just like we don't even get any lead up or any tension around that. They're just together.
And what's especially weird about the fact that it's just a given that Tonks and Lupin are together is that there's so much exposition in this movie in every other respect, but at no point are they like, we fell in love over this time period. It was a real struggle for us because Lupin has werewolfism and is really reluctant to pass that on. None of that is there. It's completely absent. It's just a given that they are like deeply in love and together.
The movies really feel like they are just relying on your idea of a kind of compulsory or standard heterosexual love story to fill in a lot of the blanks in a couple of situations. We were talking about this with the character of Ginny, and I assume we'll come back to it, but I do feel like with Tonks and Lupin, it's especially glaring because of the queer subtext of the character for the most part, that of course you can imagine what Tonks and Lupin have been doing, but that's because you're just relying on a off-the-shelf cultural narrative of why they're together and what it all means. So it's kind of disappointing to see that, actually. It's so off the shelf.
Yeah, it really is. It's really sort of conspicuous how much you're expected to fill in the blanks there. But the other piece of it is that we see Fenrir come face to face with only one child in the entire movie, and it's Ginny.
Harry?
Their confrontation has a very lascivious feel to it, right? Like Ginny's in her robe, Fenrir's got that like really low cut weird shirt. His chest is bared and he's like coming at her, and Harry has to step in front of him, and it's really like that entire everything going on with Lupin, with Fenrir, with werewolves, with queerness is all just like heterosexualized. And that's I think one of the big pieces of work that scene is doing. Yeah. And speaking of Ginny, the other weird added scene that I want to talk about was the super confusing room of requirement scene, where Ginny's like, we need to get rid of this book together. I'll lead you up to the room of requirement by the hand, and then you close your eyes. I will hide the book. Then I'll kiss you while your eyes are closed, and then maybe I was a ghost the whole time. I find that scene very strange for a lot of reasons. I really don't know what's happening.
I feel like that whole scene is some kind of outgrowth of a screenwriter who thought, oh, the room of requirement, that's where you can find things that you need. So what if you use that in a relationship context? Which is like half clever, but not really that clever. Is that one point where Ginny says, you know, this is where you come to find things.
He only kissed Cho in the room of requirement too.
Oh, shoot. It's a place where you go to kiss people.
Wait, that's so groaningly... Oh, it's the room of requirement. And
No, but you know what? No, we see people making out in the halls in this movie more than any other movie, right? So it's not just that that's the only place where you go to like make out. But I see what you're saying, Neil. It's like the implied somewhere is like, oh yeah, it's the room of requirement. And when you're a teenager and you need a place to bone, you need a place to bone, you know?
I think Neil meant it more romantically than that.
What?
Yeah, I did mean it more romantically, but I mean, you know, this being a wacky teen sex comedy, we all know what's going on there.
I mean, I think what he meant is like it's what Harry requires, like emotionally.
Oh, fuck off. Not you, Neil. Sorry, the screenwriter. Fuck off, screenwriter.
That's what I mean. It's like clever, but the implications of it are so kind of groaningly obvious.
In the episode about the book, we problematized this idea of looking at the history of Voldemort and taking for granted that he was always evil. And there was a lot of opportunity in the book to do that, assuming that our narrative perspective is compromised, right? Mm-hmm. But in a film, and Neil, maybe you can explain with proper film language words than I can, but your camera lens is supposed to be omniscient in a sense, right?
Yeah, it's very rarely associated with any particular character.
Okay.
Or a subjective experience.
Okay. So in that case, I feel like there's a lot of troubling assumptions being made about Voldemort. Like, the movie is leaning in super hard to the idea that Voldemort was always evil, always from the get-go. And we've got that one scene where Slughorn says to Harry that when Slughorn knew Voldemort as a boy, he was just a really ambitious, young, smart boy. But then later on, he contradicts that and says, you don't know what he was like. And so it's just implicit that he was always, or sorry, it's not implicit. It's stated that he was always aggressive and terrifying and threatening. And that's why people did what he wanted, which is a very different Voldemort from what we got in the books, right? So
Yeah, the memories that we get of people encountering a young Tom Riddle. For one thing, Tom Riddle is super crazy evil looking. Like I'd say even more so than the teen Tom Riddle that we see in movie 2. This young Tom Riddle is like super evil. And when he was a child, it was like, okay, he's a disturbed child. Like he's in a pretty shitty situation. I can kind of get that. And that sort of mirrors within the book how like guarded he is in the orphanage.
I don't believe you. She wants me looked at. I think I'm different.
Well, perhaps they're right.
I'm not mad.
Hogwarts is not a place for mad people. Hogwarts is a school. School of magic.
But when he gets to Hogwarts, he sort of comes out of his shell and has friends, and he's, ambitious and smart. He's head boy. He's, people like him. The teachers are charmed by him. And that the implication in the book is that people were, genuinely fooled into finding him charismatic and appealing. Whereas the way that's portrayed in the movie is that he is like magically manipulating people, right? The scene, the real memory that Slughorn reveals, Slughorn is terrified of him and is revealing this information about the Horcruxes against his will and looks scared. Like there are all of these close-in shots on his eyes and you see like he is terrified and doesn't want to be saying these things, and Tom Riddle is somehow making him do it. And that's just a totally different version of what Tom Riddle's origin story is. Yeah. And one that ties in much more to that sort of simplistic, like, oh, you're just evil. You're just evil. You're just always a bad guy.
Yeah, it really feels to me like a lot of it is in the performance of that actor. Some of it is that the camera treats him in a sort of somewhat, and his costuming and things are in a somewhat sinister manner. But I think the actor really plays that role as a character who is already evil.
I can speak to snakes too. They find me. Whisper things. Is that normal for someone like me?
Who's basically morally interchangeable with the Voldemort that we now know is played by Ralph Fiennes later, which totally endorses what I think you guys identified totally accurately as being really problematic in the books. It really leans hard into that. Like after Dumbledore and Harry watch the memory of the first time Dumbledore met him, Dumbledore says, oh, if only I'd known that he was the most evil wizard. But in that memory, it's totally inexplicable why he didn't figure that out, because it's quite clear that he is in fact an astoundingly evil wizard, or that he aspires to be.
I can make bad things happen to people who are mean to me. I can make them hurt. If I want. Who are you?
And that line, right? If only I had known, which brings us back to what I don't know if we ever actually talked about it in the podcast, but we were talking about it before the recording, which is the whole, if you could go back in time, would you kill Hitler as a baby question, right? Which is like, if you believe that evil attaches to individuals in this essentialist way, then yeah, killing baby Hitler makes perfect sense, as does killing baby Voldemort, right?
Yeah.
So the scene where Harry goes and first tries to get Slughorn's memory from him, you see Harry mirroring Tom Riddle, right? Having a very similar conversation, quoting with him. There's shots that sort of mirror the body language. So the movie's really asking you in that moment to compare Harry and Tom Riddle. And insofar as Tom Riddle is being constructed as always having been evil, Harry is being constructed as essentially good, right? As having that sort of somehow born into him. And that is really emphasized in how much this movie focuses on Harry's relationship to his mother, right? That he is his mother's son in this movie, and the whole "you have her eyes" thing comes up in a major way in this movie as a like, this is who you are as a person, this is what you're like as a person. Dumbledore tells him that his his greatest strength is his innate kindness, right? Which is like as much an intrinsic characteristic of him as Voldemort's evil.
But like innate kindness is not an attribute that I would have ever given Harry. Like it wouldn't have been on my top 10 list, for example. Like he's definitely a decent person, but like all of the evidence that we have leading up to this movie is that he's like a flawed person the way that most people are.
Yeah. When Hermione praises him for being courageous at the end of the movie, and she says, "Oh, I've always admired your courage," I mean, that rings true to me in a way that's saying that he's unfailingly kind. I mean, he's not. He's a person, right?
He nearly murdered Draco Malfoy in the bathroom in this movie. I know. In the book, it's clearly unintentional. In the movie, he's shocked that he's done it. But the big difference between movie Harry and book Harry is that the movie Harry bolts as soon as Snape gets there and starts cleaning him up. Movie Harry pieces the fuck out. Whereas book Harry stays there. Snape says, "Potter, don't move," or something like that. And then the narrator of the book tells us that Harry wouldn't have like dreamt of leaving. He was never going to leave. That's a pretty significant difference. Like if you've just mortally wounded someone, don't you think you would stay to make sure they're okay if you did it by accident?
Yeah, unfailingly kind is not Harry's primary characteristic in this movie at all, right? So that does sort of bring us back to this, like, well, why the huge emphasis on Harry's similarity to his mother in this movie, right? What is the point that they're trying to make? And Marcel, you said you had something you wanted to say about Francis the Fish.
I really do. One of my complaints about this movie as an adaptation is that I feel like we really lose a lot of the exploration of Lily that we get in the book, which is what makes the book one of my favorites. So we lose that. But what we gain in its place is this really beautiful story that Slughorn tells about Francis the Fish.
I once had a fish. Francis is very dear to me.
This fish that he had for years that was really dear to him. He is telling Hagrid the story after Hagrid's dear friend Aragog, the murderous spider, has died. And Slughorn is recounting how...
It was a student who gave me Francis.
When he first got it, it was a bowl of water that had a single flower petal floating in it.
Floating on the surface was a flower petal. As I watched, it sank. Just before it reached the bottom, it's transformed to a wee fish. It was beautiful magic, wondrous to behold. The flower petal had come from a lily. Your mother.
And then that fish was with him until the day that Lily died, and that's when Francis disappeared and was gone forever, and that's how he knew that Lily was gone.
The day I came downstairs, the day the bowl was empty, was the day your mother.
It doesn't make up for the loss of that character development that I think Lily so deserved, because for the entire book series, it's all about how much Harry is like his dad and how great Harry's dad was. And then it's like, also, you had a mother. Here's some information about her, because everyone claims to like her, but we don't know why, because no one ever talks about her. So this lovely story about Francis the Fish doesn't make up for that loss, but it is one of those really beautiful things that I think the movie provides that I wish had been in the book. And like this movie has a whole bunch of those things. I've talked about this in the past about how this movie's Harry is my favorite Harry because he's funnier and sassier. And Francis the Fish.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
That's true.
So one of the other things that I think that this movie does well as a film adaptation, I like the fact that the Vanishing Cabinet is a subplot as opposed to a surprising reveal at the end. I think that it makes for a much more interesting storyline. We talked a little bit during the movie about how it really makes the movie in a lot of senses Malfoy's movie. We learn a lot. We get to see Malfoy, which I think is really important because the book really humanizes Malfoy in a lot of ways through this horrible ordeal that he's going through where he thinks that he's going to die. And so we get to see more of that and more of his stress and anxiety about being unable to perform this task. And we don't really get that in the book because all we know is that Malfoy's disappearing and he doesn't look well. So I like the dramatic irony of learning about the Vanishing Cabinet in Borgin and Burke's, but like, oh, it's still there, blah, blah, blah. And Neale, you had made the point. Can you just make the point again about when Arthur Weasley describes what the Vanishing Cabinet does?
Arthur Weasley stops about 5 words short of giving the entire game away because he says a Vanishing Cabinet can transport you pretty much anywhere. And if he had just said pretty much anywhere where there's another Vanishing Cabinet, I feel like it would be extremely obvious what's going on at that point, that a tunnel has been created into the otherwise totally impassable Hogwarts. I just feel like it's necessary for us, the audience, especially if you don't recall the book, to know what's going on. But honestly, if he had just kept rambling on a little bit more about what a Vanishing Cabinet is, I feel like it would become extremely obvious what's going on.
Yep.
Hey guys, you know what sexy teens these days are calling spin the bottle? That's right. It's the sorting ceremony. We'll explain the rules to you later, but in the meantime, let's talk about casting, performances, and how sexy these damn teens are. I still maintain that movie 5 was Harry's sexy movie, but this is definitely sexy Malfoy movie. Like, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I agreed with that briefly until I got a really good look at Malfoy's face. I was like, oh, no, sexy's not quite the right word for what's going on with this guy here.
Stylish Malfoy?
So, certainly, like, grown-up Malfoy. Yeah. How did you describe his aesthetic?
I described his aesthetic as being fascist. Right. He, especially on the train at the beginning, the close-cropped, light as possible, platinum blonde hair, the black sort of uniform-esque, highly tailored suit. Yeah. It's not the most subtle.
I think they give Malfoy a lot of screen time in a really interesting way in this movie. And he's often in the background of scenes or often, just within group shots. Like, the camera doesn't do a lot of, like, closing in on Malfoy's face and being like, how does Malfoy feel? It's just like whatever scene's happening, Malfoy's sort of like in the background looking really freaked out about something or looking really worried or looking really distracted. And there's a lot of those like huge panning shots that sort of cross all around the castle and show you what a bunch of people are doing. And Malfoy's always like losing his shit.
He's up on the tower being tormented.
Yeah.
As an aside, the MVP of background reactions in this movie, though, is Neville. Especially in the scene with the Slug Club where they are having those sundaes for dessert. His reactions, if you just watch him in the background, are delightful. He is great.
When Ginny comes in and Harry stands up and it's inexplicable, there's this like little micro expression on Neville's face, which seems to me to be saying, should I be standing up? Like he sort of like pauses for a second and is like, and then like goes back to eating a sundae, which is really charming. I love him. I love Neville. Neale, you suggested at the beginning that it's Dumbledore's movie and that this might be the movie where this particular portrayal of Dumbledore makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that more?
Yeah, I would say that I think this is the one where what we've sort of deemed the suspicious Dumbledore, where he seems to be up to something. He seems to have plans and be directing more of Harry's life than is apparent to Harry on the surface. I think this is the one where finally that performance syncs up to what the character is actually doing in the plot. You know, his enlisting of Harry to investigate Slughorn's memories and gain this knowledge about Tom Riddle. I mean, in this movie, we're actually privy to Dumbledore's scheme. Not all of it, but we're privy to one of his many interlocking schemes. And I think when he and Harry go to that cave to get that Horcrux, I mean, it feels to me like that is what this Dumbledore would be doing. We made fun of this in the earlier movies. Michael Gambon's Dumbledore gives off the impression that he is skulking around hatching schemes, but you never actually find out whether that's the case or not. And I think in this one it's nice to find out that, yes, that is the case.
That weird schemey feel.
Yes, he does tell students to befriend their professors as part of an elaborate scheme to access their hidden memories.
Like, the fact that he hasn't read the books still is just so apparent in this movie. Because when they look at Horace Slughorn's real memory and then they come out of it and Dumbledore's, well, like, this is worse than I thought. They could be anything.
What are they exactly?
Could be anything. Most commonplace of objects.
They could be tin cans, which is precisely the opposite. Because Book Dumbledore is like, no, I've been thinking about this and researching this for years.
Michael Gambon, ad-libbed that scene?
I think so. I think he was just like, well, I don't know what we're gonna do. And then he like throws these two Horcruxes that they had, like,
Ring, for example. Or a book.
like. He has two Horcruxes because he's got the diary that was the Horcrux and is destroyed, and he's got the ring that was the Horcrux that he destroyed, which is why he's got his blackened hand. So he knows that there's more than one, but then he's like, well, it could be 7. Except that we know that there can't be 7 because one of those pieces of Voldemort's soul has to be in his body. So, like, there's 4 more. It's worse than I thought.
This is beyond anything I imagined.
It's ridiculous. You're like, what did you think? There were 3?
Marcel, can we have more of you as Michael Gambon as Dumbledore? I just think the tin can thing.
Something about Voldemort's small boat in your Dumbledore voice, please.
Look at the size of this boat. How are we going to get in this boat? It's so little. It's like a tiny boat just at the bottom of this, like, corpse-filled lake. And then little did he know that was his last ride in a tiny boat.
So sad. Okay, so another key thing that we need to talk about with the casting in this movie is the conspicuous either absence or silence of people of color. And this is the one where it's particularly obvious because we know that Lavender Brown, she's in some of the first movies at least, but she is Black and does not have a speaking role. And then in this movie, when she becomes the main character who is going to talk a lot, all of a sudden she is recast as a white girl. And then meanwhile, we have 2 like textually important characters, Dean Thomas and Blaise Zabini, both of whom have like speaking roles in the book, like who are actual characters in the book. But in the movie, neither of them, does Blaise say anything or does he just scoff? He scoffs. And Dean does literally nothing. Dean just stands about and is a thing that Ginny is dating.
Dean is on a sub-Neville level in this movie. Neville level. It's weird because I think when you adapt a book to a movie, absolutely, there have to be less characters who speak. There's just no way around it. But that's why it means so much when you decide which characters do speak and don't speak. It's so noticeable with Blaise in that scene where, in fact, we jump in the middle of a conversation that he and Draco are having, and he just doesn't get to speak in the movie we're watching. And also with Dean, because actually Dean gets talked about quite frequently in this movie. He just doesn't get to say anything.
We've got the scene when Ron is asking Harry what he thinks his sister sees in Dean, and they're in their beds. It's clearly bedtime. And like, they're all in the same dormitory. So I could only assume that Dean is in the next bed listening to them talk about like what Ginny might find appealing about him.
Guys, can you stop it? This is really weird.
Hannah McGregor is Dean Thomas.
We're so good at impressions.
Marcel Cosby is Dumbledore.
Shit, who are you gonna be? Slughorn.
Slughorn, oh yeah.
You sick Slughorn impression.
I can't even remember my Slughorn.
This guy.
This guy again.
This is the guy.
I think just the recasting of Lavender Brown is so egregious in that sense because it's a character who is canonically established to be of color, a character who plays too important of a role in the plot to be cut out of the movie. And the fact that she is recast as a white actress is just, it's so unambiguous. The altering of that character, who again can't be like Blaze, just sitting there not saying anything.
She's gotta talk.
Oh man, I think that's a real extra textual low point of this series.
You said something about having a theory about the casting of Lavender?
Yeah, my theory was that because she is such a fatuous and stupid person, that somebody was like, well, we can't have our only character of color with a speaking part be an idiot, so let's just make her a white character so that people don't think we're racist. You did not succeed. That was a failed attempt at not racism.
That's a really compelling reason to have more than one character of color. Really compelling. This is just an asterisk that we wanted to put in, but the actual actress who does play Lavender Brown, she does a good job. I mean, I don't have a problem with her.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of why I refer to it as something extra textual, because outside of this movie is where all the problem is. But yeah, I mean, she does it fine. So
Yeah, no, she has some really solid comic moments. That scene where she's writing the heart on the window. And then she like breathes back all over it so that it will be like super visible. There's like, she has some great scenes. Like she commits to her bits.
where she jumps on Ron's back in the background of that shot. That's great. That's really funny.
Yep, she's very funny. Yeah. Or the faces that she's making at Ron across the room after they've broken up and she's really mad at him and she's like grinding the spoon into the table. Like, she's good. She's solid. It's just, like you said, the extra textual business of her recasting is, especially alongside the lack of speaking roles for other people of color, is just conspicuous. Okay. Speaking of our limited female characters, we need to talk about Ginny. All right. This is the movie where Ginny all of a sudden shows up as a major character. And we are having like a real sort of like play-by-play reaction to Ginny's character as the movie went through. Because at the beginning, the movie has added in a bunch of like fun Ginny scenes and like put her into scenes that she's not in the book and like sort of built her up as a character a little bit in order to make her cooler. And it's like pretty effective in those opening scenes. Like she's pretty engaging and fun as a character. And then the second she and Harry start to get interested in each other, she gets weird. And specifically, she gets weird in a really maternal way, right? So we have Harry at the Burrow for Christmas and Ginny like comes in and sits beside him and she's like, I baked you a tart, and then she feeds it to him. Yeah. And that's weird.
Ties his shoe.
Yeah, and then later on they meet on the landing and his shoe's untied and she's like, oh, your shoe's untied. Let me tie that for you. And it's like, this isn't a sexy thing. I don't know who told you that this is a fun, sexy move, but this is not a fun, sexy move that you are doing here.
It plays into the Lily-related themes of this movie in a really weird way. I mean, considering also the role that Mrs. Weasley plays in the movie, it's a really, really strange choice to have their romance take place in that register.
As an aside, I every now and again see something occurring on the internet where someone makes the discovery that Ginny looks like Lily and says something on the internet, and then like 100 people are like, oh my God, as though it's not the most obvious thing in the universe. Like, guys, read better. Please. This movie does not make Ginny at all good enough or cool enough. It does like a really shitty job, and instead is like, look at all these kindnesses that she provides for Harry, which is gross.
Yeah, and it's just a lot of her like being inserted into scenes inexplicably, like in this way that feels really like forced, right? And in a way that is constantly pulling attention away from that really central friendship that structures the movie, right? Like we get very few meaningful interactions between Harry and his friends, comparatively speaking, in this movie. Like very little time, just like Harry and Ron and Hermione.
I mean, I think this really goes so directly to the question about adapting books to film. As I was saying, talking about the characters of color, there have to be less characters. There have to be less characters talking in the movie just to make it make sense. And I think with Ginny, they just made wrong choices up until Order of the Phoenix to make her role fairly small. And by then it's too late. You can't fix this in Half-Blood Prince and suddenly make her go from being, named Neville level character to major love interest in the span of one movie. I think this is what it looks like when you do that.
This image of the director getting the new book and being like, well, fuck. Well, it's just now nothing makes sense.
Maybe this is the same thing that was happening with Lavender too, right? Because in the first 5 movies, the actress who plays Lavender doesn't speak, or at least doesn't speak in a meaningful way, because I don't know who that actor is. Like, I don't even remember. I can't picture her. I didn't even know that she was recast because I didn't know that she ever existed in the first place, right? And so the directors must have just been like, oh, all of a sudden this character is a super important person. Great. Okay.
It's... I think this is one of those things where the movies, there's a richness and a depth to the texts that the movies just can't capture. They can do things, sequences can become more compelling, or characters' performances can be more compelling, but you sure lose out on the complicated world of Hogwarts and the sort of elaborate nature of it. It just is so streamlined in so many ways. Yeah.
Before we move on to talking briefly about our main trio, does anybody have any thoughts they wanted to add about Slughorn?
Yeah. Jim Broadbent, he is so great at this role, but he's not the Slughorn that I pictured. He doesn't have a big mustache. He's not like jolly and fat. He doesn't go like belly first through doors. He makes that comment about how like he comes by the stuffing naturally, but he's not a particularly pudgy man. Like it just, I
actually feel like the actor who plays Uncle Vernon would have been a better Slughorn. I think he would have been a perfect Slughorn. And I think he could get at that sort of that like pompous jolliness really effectively. But there is, I don't know, within the vocabulary of films, there is this way in which jovially fat can only be a little bit plump. Genuinely fat always has to be an actual villainous character, so they couldn't possibly have an actually fat Slughorn. But I think he would have been a perfect Slughorn. Yeah, and it's not like he was in this movie, so they could have just recast him. They could have done like that thing you do in plays where you like double cast parts in order to like imply thematically continuity between different characters. If they had just had Uncle Vernon as Slughorn in this, wouldn't it be great if like in his life in Little Whinging, all of the main characters from Hogwarts were just like mundane, like just neighbors and people, like the Wizard of Oz is what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is Hogwarts is all a fever dream.
Whoa.
I want to start by talking briefly about Ron. I find Rupert Grint really unnerving in this movie because he got really muscular and he spends a lot of time wearing a tank top. And I find his very, very pale but muscular arms creepy. In general, his sort of like hulking pubescence freaks me out a little bit. You're welcome for that phrase, hulking pubescence. Part of why he creeps me out in this movie is that like so much of Ron's plot is his sexual awakening. In the book, his sexual awakening is like premised on this like vindictive sort of prurient anger against the other people in his life, whereas in the movie it's just like this really sort of teen sex romparoo. I'm in love with her. Where he's just like, yeah, I'm gonna sex Lavender up.
Come on, Harry, we've got a game to win.
But that scene, right, they've just finished the Quidditch tryouts and he did really great and he got that last score and then he sort of like, or that last save, and he like poses, and then the next shot is his crotch. Literally, the next shot is like him man spread on the couch, and the shot sort of slowly backs up to encompass Hermione and Harry, but the shot stays centered on Ron's crotch. He's up on the couch, and Harry and Hermione are like down on the ground. So like it's like this triangle, and right in the center it's just his crotch, and it's like, None of this is working for me. I'm very uncomfortable about all of this.
It really makes his broomstick waggling seem kind of subtle, understated.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, the camera isn't pointed directly at that.
Yeah. What about Hermione?
I feel like these movies are not holding up to my previous love of Emma Watson as Hermione. I like, now that we're watching them and engaging with them critically, I'm so much less impressed. I mean, she's great. She's a great actress, but I'm not wowed by her in any way. She's just good. I don't know.
She's fine. She doesn't really seem to have a role in this movie. No. Like, she doesn't really seem to do anything.
Yeah.
She's like, tells Harry that he's wrong about stuff and then disappears for huge amounts of time.
Excuse me, I have to go and vomit.
Cries about Ron.
I happen to be his girlfriend. I happen to be his friend.
These girls, they're going to kill me, Harry.
It's pretty uninteresting.
I think, Hannah, your point about there not being as much of a focus on the main trio of friends is really accurate. I mean, the few scenes that they are in together are pretty good, but I mean, I do really love the scene on the train. I joked about this at the time, so I'll joke about it again on the podcast. Harry is trying to explain his concerns, and Ron is too stupid to care about it, and Hermione is too smart. It's a great scene, actually. It's just great. Harry's just frustrated by it.
So Harry's like, yeah, clearly Draco is a Death Eater, and Ron is like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, Voldemort would never choose him to be a Death Eater. He's a teen. He's a sexy teen. And then Hermione says, like, listen, I can't positively say, like, the way in which what the evidence that I viewed adds up to any particular conclusion one way or the other. Like, it's so, it's like the opposite and equally useless responses.
Yeah, Ron basically says, I don't really see that there's any suspicious things going on in the world right now. And Hermione says, how can we really know anything? Though it's ridiculous, but great.
This is my favorite Harry because he's so sassy.
So sassy.
God, he's so funny in this movie. His interaction with Slughorn when he's high on Felix Felicis is just aces.
Harry! Sir, it's nearly nightfall. Surely you realize I can't allow you to go roaming the grounds by yourself.
Well, then by all means, come along, sir.
It feels like this movie has a lot more jokes than the other movies. And yeah, Harry has a lot of funny lines.
He's so funny, right? Daniel Radcliffe just really amps up the teen masculinity, you know? I don't know. I'm into it, obviously.
Do you want to give us some audio of your favorite moment?
So there's... I'm not very good at it, though.
You're great at it.
Not to mention the pincers.
But his well then come along, sir. Which is like, it's really like the pincers, but also he's like, well, let's just go. Slughorn's like, you should be in bed. He's like, well, I'm going to Hagrid's. Like, come on.
Well, then by all means, come along, sir.
What did you say, drunk Ringo?
I really like the interpretation of the luck potion just making him high as shit. Like, that just being like what that looks like in the movie.
I love his delivery of, I just feel it's the place to be.
You love that because it features centrally in that trailer.
I feel it's the place to be tonight. Do you know what I mean? No.
I do love it,
Yeah.
actually. I think that trailer is so good.
Yeah. We've had a lot of fun here today, talking about how sexy these teens are. But I, for one, would like to know how sexiness is produced as a filmic effect. Let's find out in Madame Malkin's Props for All Occasions, our discussion of sets, special effects, props, and the material production of wizard teen sexiness. Let's start by talking about the fact that the opening 20 minutes of this movie were 3D.
Oh man, you wouldn't immediately think of 2009 as being so easily historicized, but man, that opening feels like 10 years on either side, and the opening of that movie would not look like that. So much stuff flying at the screen, the camera's flying through stuff. It stops just short of having characters toss bags of chips directly at the camera, but it comes close. The scene where they tidy up the house that Slughorn has been living in, oh man, so 2009. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I have a very distinct memory of going to see it, and I remember buying our tickets and them giving us 3D glasses or telling us that it was 3D, but then emphasizing it's only the first 30 minutes or whatever it is, but it's only that time. So after that, you can take off your glasses. And I remember I was still wearing my glasses after that point, being like, has it been 30 minutes yet?
How do I tell when
Should
it's
I?
done?
Is it done?
You
Is there
need
going
a
to be something?
character to say, take off your 3D glasses now.
Yeah.
Teens?
Yeah. Yeah. I think at one point you're just like, I guess that's it. And then just slowly taking them off your face.
Oh, man.
One of the important scenes during that phantasmagoria of bad 3D effects is our visit to the Weasley's Wizard Wheezes shop, where we witness a clown.
I have a question. I have a question for you, preeminent Harry Potter scholars and witch queens of all media. How do wizards know about clowns? Who told them about clowns? Where did they see clowns? What do they think clowns are?
I think your question is better left as a rhetorical question. I think if we try to answer it, we're going to lose the like glory that is pointing out the like nonsense.
Every day I check J.K. Rowling's Twitter to find out.
Can I just remembered right now. So because we're talking about like the construction of sexiness in this film, really I should have brought this up in our last segment, but I didn't think about it. I just want to like recognize the game of the actor who plays Cormac McLagan for being a total perv. Can we just bow down to his ability to enact perviness to an exponential degree?
So I was originally doing something else. I think I was upholding the baby during the Sunday eating scene, the slug party scene, and something happened and everybody reacted and I was like, what? I missed it. Marcel was like, sit down, I'm rewinding this. You have to stare at this. So I sat down and I still had the baby. We went back and the scene is that they're all eating the sundaes and like the thing has happened with like Ginny coming in late and Harry standing up and it being really awkward and Harry sitting down. And then you see Hermione sort of like looking at Harry like, we know what you're up to. And then Hermione looks across the table and sort of gets this look and the camera moves across the table and Cormac is looking at her and he's like licking some sundae off his finger. Off his pinky finger.
I can only describe it as lascivious.
It is lascivious. And I screamed so loudly at that gesture that the baby started crying. Whoops. Yeah.
That actually does make me think, as long as we're on this Cormac treasure, there is something I wanted to talk about left over from the last episode that does relate to this movie, which is, say what you will about Cormac McLagan, there's not an implication that he is attempting to use a love potion to get about his desired effects.
He just uses plain old patriarchal rape culture.
Yeah, and I think sadly that puts him ahead of a couple of characters in this movie. I just wanted to say that I appreciated you guys' discussion of love potions. I actually think they're worse than what you're suggesting. I think they're worse than date rape drugs. I actually think they're the fantasy equivalent of this sort of pickup artist belief that women are so mechanistic that there are just actions that you can do to manipulate the free will of people because they are female in order to cause them to consent to have sex with you or have a romantic relationship with you. I actually think...
What do you make of the fact that it's always women using them?
Yeah, I think like that is so weird, but I think you could never do it the other way around. I think it would just be so obvious and disturbing. So, I mean, it's like the only thing that swerves away from that, but I think love potions are so noxious as a concept. To me, that's what they represent. They're just the sort of fantastic epitome of that idea that women are so easily manipulable.
It is that thing, right, where because of the way that patriarchy functions and we don't believe that men can be sexually assaulted, it's funny when we turn it around, whereas it would be horrifying. But at the same time, when we turn it around and make men the targets of sexual violence and it becomes funny, what that does is it implicitly, it like takes the thorns out of the actual act of sexual assault against women, right? So it like makes that, it makes rape culture not seem real.
I think it also, by making the humor be the incongruity or the exaggeration of it, it does also normalize women as being the subjects of sexual assault. It's so terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
You were correct.
Yeah.
Can you explain why every scene of this movie is only one color?
Because this movie is Harry Potter and the Halftone Prince. Thank you. I'm here all week. Why
it is that like there are all of these scenes that are like, this scene is green, this scene is blue, ooh, now it's brown. Like there's more than two colors in the world. What's going on?
I think you're pretty much right about it. It's just a very simple effect to create a mood in a certain scene. I think this movie has some very strange, or some, not very strange actually, it pulls it off pretty well, but some pretty sharp tonal shifts between scenes. Some scenes are actually just wacky comedy. Other scenes are quite dark and grim. The scenes of Dumbledore and Harry in the cave are almost a fairy tale. They almost take place in a totally fantastic register. And I think the color is a pretty simplistic way to signal that the mood has shifted or that the mood has changed. I don't know that I can make anything specific out of the specific colors. Do you have thoughts about them?
Green is for Voldemort. Blue is for Malfoy. Like the scenes are color coded, right?
Yeah.
It's like the Voldemort flashback scenes are green.
Yeah.
The like Malfoy, something has a foot with Malfoy scenes are blue. The cave scene is black and white.
Yeah.
The oh no, something ominous is happening, the Death Eaters are on their way scene is brown. Right? So they're, I mean, it's like pretty heavy handed.
Yeah.
Visual coding. Right?
It's very straightforward.
Yeah.
Personally, I think it's a way to deal with the fact that this movie has so many different tones happening that, I mean, shooting the scene in the cave in the same way that the Slug Club dinner scene is shot would be bizarre and disorienting.
Yeah, that's actually, that's a good point. 'Cause there are like radical shifts in tone from scene to scene, and figuring out how to deal with those totally radical shifts, the like really heavy use of color might be a way of managing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's simplistic, but I think I can see why it's done. I don't know, Marcel, did you have thoughts about that?
God, no. Are you crazy?
You know, you might have thoughts about the cave.
Yeah, that's true. No, which is a black and white scene, and it has a lot of crystals and shit, and a big lake, and a little boat. Little tiny boat.
A boat that Voldemort made.
The boat that Voldemort made in the cave that Voldemort built. This is the boat that takes you to the Horcrux in the cave that Voldemort built.
This is the chain attached to the boat that takes you to the Horcrux in the cave that Voldemort built.
This is the shell inside the pedestal on the island in the lake in the cave that Voldemort built.
Beautifully done. Is there anything interestingly different about how this film is filmed from the previous entries in the series?
Well, actually, talking about that scene in the cave with the crystals, I do actually think it's interesting because that is one of the few scenes that seems to take place totally separate from representing reality in a visual way. It reminds me more of something like Lord of the Rings in terms of being a very fantastical thing, which is interesting to me because it makes the scene to me feel like it takes place in a different mode or register almost than the rest of the movie, where there is usually some sort of reference point to reality whatever it is, something recognizable to us, the audience. And by that point, it's kind of Harry and Dumbledore almost in a kind of fairy tale or a Lord of the Rings sort of space. So, I mean, that's pretty interesting. I don't know that I noticed any filmic techniques in general. The shots appeared to be of ordinary length. Although, actually, I was going to say that there do seem to be more tracking shots that move around Hogwarts. There's a couple of instances where the camera moves around the outside of Hogwarts that I'm not sure we've seen as many of before. So, tracking shots generally establish a continuity of space. It makes Hogwarts seem like a more coherent space. It also establishes that the characters... as we were talking about earlier, it establishes where the characters are in relation to each other. So you see that Draco is inhabiting a space that's continuous with Lavender and Ron, which is weird. I mean, they don't really interact that much.
That's really interesting, because then those shots become a way of sort of establishing establishing continuity between the really radically different tones, right? So like the color is a way of sort of separating out the scenes, but then these tracking shots are a way of being like, even though these feel like radically different storylines, they're actually all happening in the same place in the same time. And that's like kind of a remarkable effect of this movie, is because it's right at the breaking point before, you know, in the next one they'll have left Hogwarts and everything's radically different. But this is right at that breaking point where like things have gotten really, really dark, but they're still at school. And so sort of dealing with that, like the weirdness of having a scene where it's like, oh, who do you like? And then a scene where it's like, I hope I can murder the headmaster, because otherwise the Dark Lord's gonna kill me. It's like how do I reconcile these things happening at the same time? And the tracking shot sort of, I just did a tracking shot with my head. You can't see it, but it was really effective. Help us to deal with that. I got dizzy.
So at the beginning of the movie, when we are in the Muggle world and we see the Death Eaters like crashing into things and like destroying things, it's just like those streams of like jet black smoke flying around, and we follow them around. And then we go into Diagon Alley and smash some windows. Is that a tracking shot?
Yeah. A tracking shot is just one that where rather than the camera being in a fixed position, it follows something around.
Tracks,
so that's it.
you might say.
Yes. I mean, it's actually literally called that because they used to have to lay tracks down and put the camera on the tracks. So if you want to think about it that way, back when cameras weighed the same as, you know, train engines and whatnot. So
Now they do it all with drones.
I'm sure it's all with drones, and also I'm pretty sure a lot of these places aren't real.
Shut right up, Neil.
No, they're real. You just have to get the Amazon Prime account in order to access those areas with your drones. Right? Like a regular Amazon account, the drones won't go to those areas.
It's Amazon Wizard Prime.
Sorry, I also just wanted to say a quick thing, which is just that in the previous movie episode, I really boringly suggested something about the budget versus earnings of these movies. And I meant... I only want to correct this because I found out I was really misunderstanding the numbers. I had suggested that Half-Blood Prince was the only installment of Harry Potter to not make its budget back domestically. That is not the case. It made roughly the same amount of money as all of the other Harry Potter movies, but it inexplicably cost $100 million more to make than the previous movies.
And we were going to speculate wildly about why that might have been.
Yeah.
Let's skip the ones that make sense and just each name one that is ludicrous.
Okay.
They had to murder all those people for the cave scene. Murders don't come cheap, Marcel.
So much legal fees.
My theory is that Jim Broadbent demands $100 million and is hard as hell.
Right, because he emulates Horace Slughorn. He goes deep into method. Right. So my theory is that the Amazon Prime account was really expensive.
To get access to those drone film locations. Filmic production is such an interesting topic. Maybe one day they'll release a special edition of Harry Potter that comes with a reproduction of the original budget.
But there's a preview on the DVD for this Harry Potter movie for the special edition of Wizard of Oz, and in addition to a Wizard of Oz watch that you can have, because we all know how important watches are to the Wizard of Oz, there's a replica of the budget, so you can pretend to be an accountant in the 1930s.
I want to point out the irony that you're making fun of anybody wanting the budget for a movie shortly after having importantly clarified a point about the budget of this movie.
I'm impervious to that irony.
Well, thanks so much for listening to episode 12 of Witch Please. You can stream the rest of our episodes at ohwitchplease.ca and check out our sick new aesthetic, courtesy of illustrator Victoria Evans and Robot of Our Hearts, Trevor Chow Fraser.
Hi, how are you doing?
You can also subscribe to us on your podcatcher of choice.
But the best way to get in touch with us is to tweet at us at ohwitchplease, where we will enthusiastically debate representations of fatness, the nature of human evil, and still, ongoingly, whether or not wizards wear trousers. Never get tired of that subject. Here are some people who have been chatting with us lately. Neemels Winter, Smarakuya, Aurora Birdialis, Short to the Point, Red or MC1R, V Pilar, Savannah Goyette, Katarina Hoven, R Must Die, Kiss Me Hardy, Liba Jen, who made fun of the way that I pronounced Hannah Arendt, Flowdot, Livia the Witch, Tasting Defeat, Heather L. Neal, After 3, Andrew Bretz, DeBeckel, Karina Soros, Lloyd Pancakes, Sophie Biblio, Ms. Megan, Prashranth Ragu 2, My Book Jacket, Don't Be Stuck Up, Holly Dunn Design, The Show That Shall Not Be Named, which is an LA-based Harry Potter improv group. Cool. I know. Tracy B, Another Great Etc., The Typeset, Jessica Sporn, Janie Canuck, Or Who, Terry Lee McGarry, Nicta Trujillo, I probably said that wrong, Daniela Mariart, Sophie Biblio, The Audio Signal, Podcast Broadcast, BKS, S.J. Connor, Matt Domville, Fibrous Ruth, Paula Gabrielis, Last Nora, Triceratop, that's a great name, Physics Katie, and Rather Be Dreamin', who sent us an amazing picture of the two of them at the Three Broomsticks, Jordan Ruth, E. Jarrett, Ace Carruthers, who still hasn't read the Harry Potter books, Alana... Euterp's Delight, Indigo Han, Sparkle Lily, C. Welsky, Our Lady of Cats, Cash and Blue, Sensei Sensual, Kristen Morin, Pewter Wolf 13, Vivinia, Baliensis, and Ifia S. And a special shout out to longtime fans and friends Emily Hoven and Jason Purcell, who have both recently been accepted into prestigious graduate programs and will one day rule the world.
Well, our next episode will almost definitely be a mini-sode, but who knows what it'll be about? Not us. Who can predict the future? But we'll figure it out, don't worry. Until then...
Later, witches.
I'm sorry, sing that for me.
Who put the dog in the doghouse? You did, baby, you did. Who put the cat in the cat house? You did, baby, you did. Who put your granny in the granny house? You did, baby, you did. You did. I don't remember the rest.
Holy shit!
Wow.
Holy shit! I forgot that existed.
Wow.
Jesus.
You're welcome.